Everything changed in a matter of seconds. Literally, just one sudden movement, one agonizing drop to the turf. You can picture it, right? The stadium goes entirely, completely silent as the medical cart rolls out onto the field. And just like that, in the blink of an eye, the destiny of an entire NFL franchise is left hanging by a searchable thread. Welcome to NFL Nexus. Today, we are breaking down a story of absolute high-stakes leverage, unthinkable medical risks, and, honestly, pure front office panic. We're going to peel back the curtain on what might just be the most controversial, intricately woven offseason maneuvering we have seen in the modern era of the league. Because look, what we are looking at today isn't just a simple contract negotiation. It's not your routine roster move. No, it is a highly volatile $200 million gamble with the absolute future of the Indianapolis Colts lying directly in the balance. In this explainer, we are going to examine the exact granular mechanics of how a front office maneuvers when their backs are firmly, undeniably pressed against the wall. And trust me, you are going to want to hear how this all unfolded.
So it really begs the ultimate question. What actually happens when an entire NFL franchise bets its absolute future on a torn Achilles tendon? To truly understand the sheer gravity of this situation, we have to contextualize the immense, almost suffocating pressure inside the Indianapolis Colts front office right now. General Manager Chris Ballard and his entire regime are entering what is universally understood across the league as a make-or-break season. This is the kind of year where jobs are entirely on the line. Legacies are on the line. The patience of the ownership is pretty much exhausted at this point, and this immense pressure is completely tethered to the health of one man, quarterback Daniel Jones. Because before the injury, Jones actually had a shocking resurgence. He authored this brilliant run that guided Indy to an 8-5 record, tossing 19 touchdowns to just 8 interceptions. He was definitively their guy, he had totally mastered the system, and then, well, the late season disaster struck, an Achilles tear. Look, in professional sports, the Achilles is essentially the grim reaper of mobility and power. It is widely regarded as the absolute toughest injury to return from, especially for a quarterback. Think about it. A quarterback relies entirely on the sudden, explosive planting of his back foot to generate NFL-level velocity and drive the ball downfield. Without that tendon operating at 100%, the mechanics completely fall apart. The Colts had to watch their franchise quarterback get carted off the field, knowing full well that the offseason was looming, free agency was rapidly approaching, and the massive financial bill was about to come due.
Chris Ballard woke up to what is essentially a general manager's nightmare scenario. As the free agency window started rapidly approaching, the Colts' war room was defined by two critical, absolutely non-negotiable priorities, yet they were haunted by one practically impossible choice. First, they absolutely had to retain quarterback Daniel Jones. You simply cannot enter a make-or-break year with your job literally on the line without the quarterback who just proved he could efficiently run your highly specific offensive system. And secondly, they desperately needed to lock down wide receiver Alec Pierce. We're talking about a player fresh off a phenomenal, breakout 1,000-yard campaign. He'd become the absolute focal point of their passing attack. But here is the brutal, unforgiving reality of the NFL's collective bargaining agreement. You only have one franchise tag to deploy. Just one. So think about the strategic paralysis happening here. You have two foundational pieces of your offensive core poised to hit the open market, totally ready to be poached by the highest bidder, and you only have one singular protective shield to keep them in the building. The tension in Indianapolis was palpable, man. It was leaking out into every single insider report. How do you manipulate the salary cap and the stringent legal framework of the league to somehow keep both players without absolutely destroying your financial future in the process? It's like a giant puzzle, but if you put the wrong piece in, the whole thing explodes. To solve this massive dilemma, the Colts jumped through a truly obscure loophole, the transition tag. Let's really pause and unpack the granular details here for a second, because this is the fulcrum of their entire offseason strategy. Most fans, and honestly even most analysts, focus entirely on the standard franchise tag. We hear about it every single March. The franchise tag legally locks a player in for 1 year at a premium rate. It is incredibly secure. But the transition tag? Well, it is a rarely used, incredibly risky legal designation. It guarantees the original club the right of first refusal to match any contract offer the player makes with another team on the open market. But there is a massive, glaring catch. If you choose not to match that competing offer, you get absolutely zero compensation, nothing. No draft picks, no compensatory safety net. You just straight up lose the player. So, the Colts looked at the board, evaluated their dire lack of leverage, and decided to slap this obscure tag on Daniel Jones. Think about the sheer mechanics of this for a second. By using the transition tag, the Colts essentially told the rest of the National Football League, hey, go ahead, negotiate a massive deal with our severely injured quarterback, do the heavy lifting for us, and we reserve the right to match it. It's a high-wire act of the highest order. They were desperately buying time, trying to manipulate the complex roster rules to artificially create leverage in a situation where they were practically backed all the way against a wall.
And that legal maneuvering,
It led directly to a staggering financial commitment: $88 million. After applying that transition tag, the Colts didn't even wait for another franchise to set the market. The panic seemingly set in deep, and they struck a massive 2-year deal with Daniel Jones themselves. Let's really break down the weight of this gamble. They committed up to $88 million to a quarterback who, at the exact time the ink was drying on the contract, literally couldn't even walk properly without assistance. When you look closely at the fine print, the contract is structured essentially as a highly expensive choice for the team down the road. It acts as a 1-year $50 million deal if his recovery goes catastrophically wrong and they have to cut him, or a full 2-year $88 million pact if he miraculously returns to his pre-injury form. But I really want you to feel the magnitude of handing $50 million guaranteed to a player recovering from a freshly torn Achilles. The audacity of this gamble is truly breathtaking. They are betting their jobs, their salary cap health for the next half-decade, and the sanity of their fiercely loyal fan base on the miraculous expedited healing of a single tendon. But as we all know, in the NFL, every action has an equal and extremely expensive reaction. This one triggered an absolute avalanche: $114 million. This is the domino effect in its purest, most terrifying financial form. Because the Colts deployed their one and only tagging mechanism on Daniel Jones, their hands were completely tied regarding their star receiver, Alec Pierce. He was heading straight for the unrestricted open market, where teams with absolute mountains of cap space were just waiting to outbid them. The Colts were absolutely forced to back up the Brinks truck to keep him from walking out the door. Without the threat of the tag, they locked Pierce down with a gargantuan 4-year deal worth $114 million. And the specific number that truly keeps general managers awake at night in a cold sweat, $60 million of that contract is fully, irrevocably guaranteed at signing. Because they couldn't tag Pierce, they lost every single ounce of negotiating leverage they possessed. They had to pay elite top-of-the-market superstar money just to ensure their injured quarterback would still have someone familiar to throw to when, or if, he eventually returns to the field. So let's take a step back and look at exactly where they stand now. The grim reality of the NFL salary cap is that it is a completely zero-sum game. The contract domino effect is just ruthless. First, they deployed the transition tag on Daniel Jones. That single decision forced them into a corner where they had to blindly hand out a $114 million contract to Alec Pierce. But the salary cap is a finite pie, right? And when you give 2 incredibly massive slices away to secure 2 players, someone else on the roster is going to go hungry. And that someone was longtime wide receiver 1, Michael Pittman Jr. To afford this specific sequence of unprecedented financial events, the Colts had to agonizingly part ways with a highly productive cornerstone of their franchise. Pittman, who was entering the final year of his deal and looking for a well-deserved extension of his own, had to be completely sacrificed on the altar of the salary cap. So you have an injured quarterback on a massive, incredibly risky deal. You have a newly crowned primary receiver who has to flawlessly live up to a $114 million price tag, and you've lost your most reliable, chain-moving veteran receiver in Pittman. The final result of all this maneuvering? Zero margin for injury setbacks. Absolutely none. If anyone trips, if a rehab stint takes a week too long, or if a player tweaks a hamstring in camp, this entire $200 million house of cards collapses instantly. And this is exactly where the external scrutiny becomes absolutely deafening. Listen to this quote from ESPN's Seth Walder. He's an analytics expert who recently graded the off-seasons for all 32 teams, and he specifically flagged this bizarre series of moves by Indianapolis as highly problematic. Quote, "I struggle to see which team would have been nearly as excited as the Colts to give Jones real money coming off an Achilles injury." Just let that sink in for a moment. It really makes you wonder, who exactly were the Colts bidding against? Like I said earlier, when you use the transition tag, you are essentially daring the open market to make a competitive offer. But who in the National Football League was actually going to hand out $50 million guaranteed to a 29-year-old quarterback with a rich, documented injury history coming off a freshly surgically repaired Achilles tendon? The market was likely a complete ghost town. And yet, the Colts seemingly negotiated entirely against themselves, outbidding a non-existent market for a seriously injured player. When you contrast the Colts' panicked reality with the alternate strategy proposed by ESPN analysts, it's honestly chilling in its simplicity. In reality, as we've meticulously covered, the Colts panicked. They utilized the obscure transition tag on Jones, paid him a massive premium to stay, lost their crucial leverage on Pierce, had to guarantee Pierce an astronomical $60 million, and consequently lost Michael Pittman Jr. to cap constraints. But what was the alternative path? What could they have done differently? Walder and other cap analysts suggest a route that definitely requires nerves of steel, but offers absolute financial protection. Let Daniel Jones test the market. Just call his bluff. Let him go out there into free agency and see exactly what a quarterback with a torn Achilles realistically commands from other general managers. Spoiler alert here. It would not have been a fully guaranteed $50 million. By letting Jones face a cold, dead market, the Colts could have then taken their most powerful weapon, the traditional franchise tag, and slapped it firmly on Alec Pierce, legally binding him to the roster and keeping their long-term options open. This granular, highly specific financial difference is precisely what separates dynasty-building general managers from the ones desperately looking for a job the following January. When you break it all down to the raw numbers, this alternate route makes so much more sense. $27.3 million. That is the exact fixed cost of a one-year franchise tag for a wide receiver in the NFL under the current collective bargaining agreement. If the Colts simply had the patience to let Jones navigate his own cold market, they could have legally bound Alec Pierce to the team for one single year at $27.3 million. Yes, Pierce had a fantastic breakout 1,000-yard season, we know that. Yes, he significantly evolved his route-running chops and became a genuine deep threat. But is he destined for absolute, undeniable superstardom year after year? Why not make him prove it one more time? Instead of handing him $60 million in fully guaranteed cash over the next 2 years, permanently locking yourself into his contract regardless of his future performance, you force him to repeat his success on a fully guaranteed but short-term, one-year deal. You protect your salary cap flexibility. You protect the long-term health of the franchise. But the Colts? They didn't do that. They bypassed the safer route and deliberately chose the path of maximum financial exposure. And just when you think the tension in Indianapolis couldn't possibly get any tighter, we get the dramatic, almost unbelievable twist to this whole saga. The ink on Alec Pierce's $114 million contract is barely dry. I mean, the press conference confetti hasn't even been swept up off the facility floor yet. And what happens? Immediately after securing $60 million in fully guaranteed money, Alec Pierce requires ankle surgery. Look at the landscape now. You have your franchise quarterback currently rehabbing from one of the most devastating, career-altering lower body injuries in all of professional sports, earning $88 million, and your newly minted, highly paid #1 wide receiver, the guy you sacrificed all your leverage and your veteran receiver to keep, is suddenly sidelined with his own lower body surgery. The massive, guaranteed contract that was meant to stabilize the offense and provide a completely reliable target instantly looks incredibly perilous. The Colts' entire offseason master plan is suddenly completely dependent on the medical staff's ability to heal tendons and ligaments faster than the clock ticking down to week 1. Which brings us directly to the grueling medical reality of this situation. Let's meticulously track Daniel Jones's rehab timeline milestone by milestone, because this is literally what the entire season hinges on. Late 2025, the Achilles tears. This is the absolute lowest point, obviously requiring immediate surgical intervention and immobilization. But fast forward to spring 2026, and reports from insiders like SI's Albert Breer indicate Jones met all his early rehabilitation marks. Now, that is a massive sigh of relief for the front office, for sure. However, the Colts were incredibly, intensely careful. They purposefully withheld him from the chaotic, totally unpredictable environment of spring 11-on-11 practices, where bodies are flying and accidental contact is frequent. They kept him strictly to individual, non-contact drills on a side field. The real target date for his true return? Late July 2026, training camp. That is when the training wheels officially come off and the real 11-on-11 full-speed action begins. He has to prove he can evade a live pass rush. If he clears that massive hurdle, the projection is a week 1 return in September. But remember, as we've said, an Achilles injury is exceptionally treacherous. One false step, 1 day of lingering soreness, or a slight overcompensation leading to a hamstring pull, and this entire fragile timeline shifts, plunging the franchise right back into absolute chaos. And if you want to know exactly why a medical setback spells total, unmitigated disaster for this franchise, just take a good hard look at the Colts depth chart behind Jones. This is the so-called safety net they've managed to assemble. First, you have Anthony Richardson. Now, he's a former first-round pick with sky-high physical potential, we all know that, but he is completely unproven as a consistent passer and has been surrounded by persistent, concerning rumors of a deep disconnect with the coaching staff's philosophy. Then you have Riley Leonard, a 2025 draft pick who's strictly a developmental project, needing years of refinement. You absolutely cannot hand him the keys to a win-now team with jobs on the line. Finally, you have Easton Stick, a former Charger who is quite simply fighting every single day just to stay off the roster bubble. Let me be incredibly clear here. There is no actual safety net. If Daniel Jones is not under center in week 1, taking live snaps, dropping back, and planting that surgically repaired foot in the turf with absolute unwavering confidence, the Colts season is practically over before it even begins. The drop-off in proven execution and command of the offense from Jones to this backup room is just a staggering cliff edge. Zooming out to the macro scale of the National Football League, this isn't just a story about one player's ankle or another player's Achilles tendon. This is the ultimate anatomy of a make-or-break year. In the modern NFL, patience is an incredibly rare luxury that general managers simply do not possess. The front office bet the literal house, $200 million of the owner's money, on the precarious medical resilience of two key players. They parted ways with productive, deeply reliable veterans to afford this. They brought in totally unproven depth options to fill the massive gaps created by their top-heavy spending. They constructed a roster strategy that leaves absolutely zero room for bad luck, standard physical regression, or even minor injuries. If this highly specific, incredibly expensive sequence of contracts fails to yield immediate on-field results, if the offense stutters out of the gate in September, we are not just talking about a disappointing losing season. No. We are talking about the very real, very heavy probability that the Colts' entire front office is dismantled, packed up, and fired next year, resetting the franchise entirely. The stakes here, both financially and professionally, could not possibly be higher. So, I leave you with this provocative, lingering question that will undoubtedly define the rest of the year in Indianapolis. Will Chris Ballard's $200 million gamble go down in history as a brilliant masterstroke of stability, proving every single doubter and cap analyst completely wrong? Or is this going to be remembered as the absolute worst offseason mistake in the NFL, a permanent cautionary tale of mismanaged leverage, outright panic, and overwhelming medical hubris? I want to know exactly what you think about this situation. Head down to the comments right now and tell me your thoughts on Chris Ballard's aggressive moves. Are you buying into the Colts' high wire act, or are you fading them completely? And before you go, I need you to like this explainer, hit that subscribe button, and critically support NFL Nexus by becoming a channel member. Joining as a member is absolutely the best way to help us keep diving deep into the defining, unseen moments of the league, just like this one. Thanks for exploring this incredibly complex narrative with me, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.